Hello everyone. If you're watching this video, then you've obviously just been assigned to do an annotated bibliography, and while some of you may already know how to do this, others of you may not. So this lecture is going to cover exactly how to do it and why you're having to do it in the first place. Now, I'm going to cheat here just a little bit and use another university's resources on what an annotated bib is. I've used the University of Maryland's video on this before, but somehow they've taken the video down, so I'm just going to use it here. By the way, if you want to go to this website and see exactly what I'm reading, the web address is up here, and also I will be linking it on our course homepage. All right, so let's get into this. How to write an annotated bibliography MLA style. What's an annotation? All it is just a brief summary of an article or a book or a website or some other source that you're using, and it gives enough information to make the reader decide whether to read the complete work. In other words, if the reader were exploring the same topic as you, is the material useful? And if so, why? So that's the whole point in doing an annotation, is to give the reader some idea of what that article or source is about and whether or not you're going to use it. How does it differ from an abstract? An abstract summarizes the article, book, website, or whatever, but it only describes what that particular source is doing. Annotations can be descriptive, but what you're going to be doing for your annotated bibliography is going to be more evaluative and critical annotated bibliography. In a sense, what you're going to be doing is telling the reader what is in that source, what its biases are, and whether or not you're going to use it. So it does critique the source that you're looking at. An annotated bibliography is an organized list of sources. It's very much like a references list or works cited page, except for the fact that each bibliographical citation, which you learned how to do for a works cited page, is followed by a paragraph length annotation, which is usually 100 to 200 words in length, which is what it needs to be for this assignment. Now, depending on the assignment, you may be providing a literature review on a particular subject, or you're trying to formulate your thesis, which some of you may be trying to do by reading sources on the topic, demonstrating the research you performed on a particular subject, which is another reason why I'm having you do the annotated bib, is to show me you're doing the work. Provide examples of major sources of information available on that topic, and describing items that other researchers may find of interest on the topic, which isn't quite what we're doing with ours, but let's roll with it. Two types of annotated bibliography. You're not going to be doing a descriptive or informative one, so I'm going to skip all the references to that one. Instead, what you're doing is an analytical or critical one. And what an analytical critical annotated bibliography does is it not only summarizes the material, but it analyzes what's being said. It does a rhetorical analysis, in fact, of that particular source. It examines its strengths and weaknesses of what's presented, as well as describing how applicable it is to your own conclusions to the research being conducted. And that's generally the sort of annotated bibliography you'll do at the college level. For example, we've got this, and this is going to be a source. You notice that they don't do what I ask you to do, which is shorten that using something like tinyurl.com. I would prefer that if you did that. But imagine that this is all the same, except for this part. This part at the end would have tinyurl.com, blah, 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 and then the date you accessed it. This is what the annotation looks like. This scholarly article is a critical introduction to the works of Maya Angelou and the criteria surrounding her success as a poet laureate. The author points out Angelou's literary influences that include William Shakespeare, Edgar Allan Poe, Douglas Johnson, Langston Hughes, among others. Boy, punctuation in this is terrible. This article also points out that her poetry lacks cultural boundaries, yet her trademark lies in the secular chants, songs, and games of the Black vernacular tradition. The author discusses dialect and vernacular rhythms in several of Angelou's poems and compares several of her works to the racy dialect of Sterling Brown and Langston Hughes. Also discussed is her political cultural voice and her deep understanding of emotion. This article is a good resource for those wanting to explore criteria related to the achievement of the award of Poet Laureate and how Angelou meets the criteria. This article begins to explore the poet's works and suggests her ability to add to an audience's collective memory. The author is a professor of English at James Madison University and has authored a book on Sterling Brown and numerous critical essays. Now, it says to pay attention to those last three sentences that give information about the author and critique the author's research. What you are going to do in addition is say, I will not be using this source because, or I will be using this source because. Bearing in mind that if you decide not to use a source that you include on your annotated bibliography, you're still going to have to do your minimum number of sources for the final paper. You'll just replace that particular source with something that works better with your paper. So bear that in mind. You can indeed include sources on your annotated bib that you do not use in the final paper. That's perfectly fine, as long as you don't have an annotated bib that's full of sources that you're not going to use. Then you're giving yourself double the work. Hopefully, in this research project, you will find at least 2 or 3 sources from the very start that you can use, and maybe 1 or 2 that you don't. On the other side of things, by contrast, you also can use all of the sources that you find in your annotated bib for your final paper. It's perfectly fine to do that too. To get started writing an annotated bibliography, you of course have to choose your sources first. You have to do some research. You have to find some stuff about the topic that you're writing about, and this involves doing research much like any other project. If you are doing an argumentative paper that is supporting a particular conclusion that you've made, then you're going to look for sources that are going to support that conclusion. If you're doing a paper that is argumentative in that it chooses a side, you're going to have to look at sources on both sides of the argument so that you can show what the other side's argument is and what's wrong with it or why you don't accept it. You should then review those sources and choose the ones that provide a wide variety of perspectives on your topic. Article abstracts are helpful in this process because they let you know whether or not it's going to be good for you. Those of you who may be using CQ Researcher, for instance, have been told that you can use CQ Researcher for pros and for con articles. What I would do, though, is also find at least 1 or 2 more of those to make sure you have the fullest range of opinions. If you're doing a research paper where you're presenting your view on something, then that's going to look slightly different. When it comes to writing the annotation, you have to make sure that your complete citation, the complete bibliographical citation, comes first, and that it's properly formatted in MLA format, and that the annotation immediately follows after it without any line breaks. In fact, one of the things about annotated bibliographies is that the formatting has to be just perfect. That's the only way to get a full A on an annotated bib. In some ways, that's an easy A, and I'll show you why that is in a minute. Depending on the type of annotated bibliography you're writing, you're going to want to include some or all of the following, which is going to be the purpose of the work, summarizing its content, telling us who the author is, who is the intended audience for that work, why is it relevant to your topic. If it has any special or unique features, you can put those in, like maps or graphs or whatever. Just tell us that it has them, but you don't have to. You also don't have to go into the research methodology because that's a little bit beyond the scope of any assignment that I would give. But you do have to give the strengths, weaknesses, or biases in the material. So if you find that it's a little too biased, then you'd say this is a weakness, or you'd say that the person has established their ethos, their credibility to speak on the subject, and therefore that's a strength of the article. The thing that you have to include at the end of every annotation that you do is, I will be using this work, or I will not be using this work. And hopefully your annotation is going to explain to me why it is that you will or will not be using it. This document that you see before you is a model annotated bibliography. This could be on any subject for any class. It doesn't matter if it's English 102 or Core 3000 or Core 1000 or English 101. Doesn't matter. This is the way you would format it. As you would usually do, your heading should follow this format in double spacing. Some of you have not been terribly good about that in your submitted papers, you need to do it correctly here, which would be your name, course and section number, and then for the assignment name, write annotated bibliography on whatever your topic is. You can say annotated bibliography on this or annotated bibliography on that, and give the date, the due date for the annotated bib. Now you notice that you have on the next line a bibliographical citation. And that is exactly the sort of bibliographic citation that you would do for a works cited page. In fact, if you end up using all of your sources in your annotated bib, all you have to do to make a works cited page for that paper is to take all your annotations out. That's all you have to do. Make sure, by the way, to take all your annotations out, because I have in the past gotten works cited pages that have the annotations still in them, which is at least a letter grade off. So that's a big mistake that you want to avoid doing. The annotation begins on the very next line after the bibliographic entry, but the first line is indented another 5 spaces. And you notice that's the way you do a hanging indent, right? Right. The next part is going to be your annotation, which begins on the very next line after the bibliographic entry. But you notice that the first line is indented another 5 spaces. Now, if you've got your hanging indent set up correctly here, then you should be able to go to the very next line and tab in. Now, this one isn't set up quite the right way that we need to do it, but if I were to do this and start typing, don't ask me what language this is, I don't know. It should, there it goes. You see what just happened? It goes back to here. The rest of the annotation is indented to match the indentation of the bibliographic entry. So this line is indented another 5 spaces, but this one, this line of the annotation, oops, let's get rid of that extra space, is flush with that line up there. It's got to come directly underneath that. Now this annotation is roughly 100 words. It summarizes the content of the source and explains why it will or will not be helpful in the student's paper. The very next citation comes after this. And remember that just like a works cited page, your sources should be in alphabetical order by the author's last name. So we've got Bond, B-O. I hope they don't have B-O. And Bradshaw, B-R. That's how you do it. Alphabetically by the author's last name, or if you don't have a last name, by the first name, the first word in the title. This is going to go on the very next line. You notice this comes back out to the margin because it needs to. It comes flush left to the margin. You get that hanging indent again, and then your very next annotation comes underneath it. Let me push this to the next page so you can see it all together. There we go. All right. This goes all the way to the left, hanging indent. Keep typing from here. Do another 5 spaces indent or just a tab. That's all you need to do. And then this line, as you continue typing your annotation, should scroll back to here. If it doesn't, you need to figure out how your hanging indent is working. You need to sort that out. Remember that in the paper template that I have given you, that works cited page is already pre-formatted, so it should work. All you have to do is just copy and paste your bibliographic citation in there and then start typing your annotation. And you see the next source is John Cloud. The next source is Sabina Lowe and Dorothy Espelage. But since Sabina Lowe is listed first, her last name goes first, so it's Lowe. And this one only has 4 sources. Now, depending on the assignment you've been given, you may have as many as 5 or 6, but it doesn't matter. This is the way you would do it, making sure that everything fits into this same format. Now, this is a sample annotated bibliography written by a former student of mine who received an A- for the assignment. Obviously, their name was not Tiffany, case student. I have changed the identifying information. But they were specifically writing a paper on NASA and why it should be funded better than it currently is, or currently was as of 2016. Now you notice what they have done. They've done everything correctly, that this is an MLA documentation citation, a bibliographic citation. They've done the tiny URL. Probably they lost that, they got that minus sign because they didn't put a period here. So I'm going to put it in here just so you know to do it. They gave the access date, and then they did their annotation. This article discusses the cancellation of a NASA-based project that was put into practice by former President George W. Bush, but was canceled by President Obama. It also discusses the repercussions that this had, like the loss of many jobs for the American people. More importantly, missing comma. Yeah, you have to make sure that your annotations still follow the rules. More importantly, comma, it highlights the lost state that NASA finds itself in. Money is a big issue for it, comma, but more importantly is the concern of purpose and identity. NASA doesn't know what it wants to do. In order for there to be changes, comma, there needs to be a clear plan for it to execute. The article brings into consideration the issue of lack of leadership and vision. It is not just money that it lacks, but also a definite goal. Due to the different perspective that it brings, comma, I feel like this article would enhance my argument by saying that money won't solve everything. I could create a counter argument using this information by stating that even if we provide money to the space program, what good is it if we don't know what to do with it? For this reason, I will be using this article in my last paper. There you go. That's what the annotation should look like. And you notice that, again, starts right underneath their heading. It indents here, but it comes back here. The annotation is about yay long. It is 197 words. That's great. And the very next one starts right after it. And that one is, this one starts MA, this one is MK, this one is NA for NASA. There isn't an author for that one, or there isn't an author listed for this one, which is why they didn't put an author down. SP, and they only had 4 sources for this one, so that's pretty much it. Now you notice how quick it's going to be for me to grade these, because what I'm going to be doing is checking the formatting first. I'm going to see whether or not this is correct. I'm going to make sure that all this indentation is correct. I'm going to make sure that these are in MLA format. I'm going to make sure that your sources are in alphabetical order, and that there are no extra spaces anywhere in the paper. And then I will start reading the annotations. So if you've got formatting errors, or you don't do this right, or the indentation's wrong, or there's, space between these to make it pretty. If you don't get this right, or you decide to put an extra space in there because it looks prettier, or you put an extra space in here because it looks prettier, or this goes all the way over here, or this goes all the way over here, which it should not do. In fact, let me change that so we don't get ahead of ourselves. It's not about prettiness. It's about following directions. That's exactly what this assignment is about. And it's also about showing me the research that you have done for your project. So please make sure that you do this to your absolute best ability, because it can be a very easy A, as long as you're not, leaving out commas and not putting periods after your tiny URLs and stuff like that. But it can also lose you points very quickly. Luckily, the annotated bib is not a large portion of your grade, so it's not going to be all that problematic if it turns out that you get, say, a B or a C. Now, if you get a D or an F on it, that's another problem entirely, and I want to ensure that you don't do that. So I'm hoping that all of this is going to be helpful to you in putting together that annotated bibliography. If you have questions, then please put them in the comments below. Make sure to comment in the comments below to let me know that you did see this video. And if you have further questions, you can of course email, text me. Good luck to you. I look forward to reading your annotated bibs, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.